you are in a romantic relationship? Married, dating someone? Okay, all right. How many of you have never had a time when you fought or disagreed with your significant other within the last year? Never. Never, okay. So we have one person. Zach, within the last 2 years? No, okay. So, just wanted to check. So it's very rare that in romantic relationships, where you have partners that never have times when they disagree, disappoint, or annoy each other. One of the challenges of being in a romantic relationship is to not let those relatively minor issues get in the way of the relationship as a whole. So today I want to first talk about how low self-esteem individuals have difficulty with this. And then I'm going to get into my own research and an intervention that's successful in helping people with low self-esteem. And then last, I'll talk about the larger implications of this study. I hope that you'll be able to walk away with a better understanding of the loved ones in your life, as well as walk away with a tool that you could even use. So to start, the negative impacts of low self-esteem on romantic relationships is something that is really well documented in the literature. Stanford and colleagues have culminated the work into the dependence regulation model. And in this model, low self-esteem individuals tend to underestimate how much their partners love them and tend to be hypersensitive to signs of rejection. And unfortunately, see signs of rejection even when such signs don't exist. They react to various real or imagined threats by distancing themselves from their partner, because it might make the threat of rejection less potent. Now, unfortunately, these defensive behaviors over time can deteriorate the relationship and can reinforce that feeling that I'm not a person who's lovable. So this is where I thought this is where I could intervene. This is a possibility where I could make a difference by having people not jump to conclusions about minor conflicts, but instead see them as something as more situational. So now I want to tell you about how I approached my research. So before I do that, I want to tell you about how I thought I could intervene, which is with this self-affirmation theory. So self-affirmation theory that holds that when a valued part of who you are is threatened, people tend to react defensively. But if you get people to think about other things that are important to them and have them write about it, it almost acts like this defensive buffer where they don't feel this need to respond defensively. And so this is where I thought I could apply this to romantic relationships. Self-affirmation has also been used in other domains, including academic achievement for minority people. So now I do want to get into my research questions. Before I do that, though, I do want to have you imagine the relationship between John and Tara. Let me back up and say, John and Tara have a great relationship. John really loves Tara. He finds her adorable, lovable, and just simply great. And now John and Tara go out on this date. It's Friday night. It's a date that they had both been really looking forward to. But 10 minutes, John is found on the phone. And Tara's sitting there wondering, why? You can imagine that if Tara had low self-esteem, she might think, gosh, John must be on the phone because he doesn't really care about this date. He doesn't really care about me. He doesn't truly love me. But what if she were able to think about other things that are important to her life? Maybe then she could reason, well, maybe John is on the phone because something important must have come up with work. And I'm going to just leave it at that. So my research questions were, can a self-affirmation intervention improve relationship intimacy and trust for people with low self-esteem when they're faced with this conflict? And second, can the intervention help people see that their minor conflicts are more situational? So to do this, I recruited low self-esteem participants around campus, and a majority were female, college-aged. They were in exclusive dating relationships by the majority and had a mean relationship length of about 20 months. When participants came into the I had them first fill 2 questionnaires, assessing relationship intimacy and relationship trust. I then had them complete a self-affirmation task. Now in this task, you're given a list of 12 personal values, and you're asked to rank them in order of importance. So you would put the value most important to you, perhaps academics or sense of humor or living in the moment, as your top ranked value, and then your least ranked value would be on the bottom. Participants who were randomly assigned to the treatment condition were asked to spend the next 10 minutes thinking about why that value is important to you and to who you are. Participants in the control condition were asked to spend time thinking about where their least ranked value, in this case athletic ability, might be important to someone else. Participants then completed a relationship threat task in which I asked them to think about a minor ongoing conflict in their relationship. And then they filled out a questionnaire where I asked them to explain some of the potential reasons why they think that conflict comes up. I again asked them to rate their relationship in terms of intimacy and trust, and then I followed up with them 2 weeks later and asked them again, how intimate do you feel in your relationship? How much do you trust your partner? Now, this is what I first found. When I first looked at the data, there were no statistically significant differences between the control group and the treatment group. What I had predicted was that the treatment group would be higher in terms of relationship intimacy and relationship trust. So somewhere over here. So when I found this, I said, well, I probably should take a different approach to looking at my data. So this is what I did instead. I grouped those that had written about relationships with family, with friends, or membership to their group as their #1 value. And I said, these are people that have values that are socially oriented. They had ranked these as their #1 value. And then I lumped everyone else as those that were other values oriented. So when I looked at it this way, I found that it impacted relationship intimacy. So those that had said relationships with family, relationship with friends are most important, when they wrote about it in the treatment condition, they benefited from the treatment condition to the extent that they had higher relationship intimacy 2 weeks after the intervention. But those that had wrote about other values, or said that they valued other values, and when they wrote about it, they didn't actually benefit from that writing exercise. This interaction between values orientation and condition is something that I also found for a situational attribution item in my questionnaire. So dividing it up between the 2 groups also impacted that one item. So here, I had asked participants, to what extent do you think that the conflict came up because of the circumstances at the time? And higher ratings mean more endorsement of that situational explanation. For people that were socially oriented, so they said, I care about family the most, I care about friends the most, and they wrote about why that value is important to them, they benefited from the treatment condition to the extent that they were more likely to say, my minor conflict had more to do with the circumstances. But those with other values didn't benefit from writing about their values. So when I saw this data, I started to think, why? Why is it that the intervention was so successful, but only among a subset of the group? So what I did is I went back and I looked at what people wrote about in those affirmation writing exercise. And here's what one participant wrote. I believe that the most important thing in life is family. No matter what happens, your family will love you unconditionally, and they will always be the people closest to you. Another person wrote, ultimately our family members are also the people who will always be in our lives. The people who care about us the most. To be close to a family member thus implicates a special lifelong bond. And finally, another participant wrote, my immediate family is extremely important to me. They make me feel safe, loved, and valued. So one potential reason is that for these individuals, writing about family members can make that question, am I a person who is lovable, loom less large. These affirmations may act as a reminder that there are people outside of their romantic relationship that care about them, that love them unconditionally. And this may make the threat of being unaccepted by a partner less threatening. So the interaction that we saw between values affirmation and the types of values that people wrote about is something that matches well with some recent work by other researchers in self-affirmation. So these researchers find that the active ingredient to self-affirmation is social belonging themes, writing about social belonging. And so as I move forward to graduate school, there are a few more things that I would like to do to extend this research. The first being, when I did my study, I only found statistically significant results for one item. So I'd be interested in developing a more robust, valid, and reliable questionnaire that can more readily tap how do people explain the conflicts in their relationship. The next thing that I want to do is figure out why is it that the intervention worked, but 2 weeks later. It suggests that something must be happening in the real world to the extent that writing about your family or writing about your friends can benefit the romantic relationship at hand. Now I want to back up and look at the larger implications of this study. What I saw in my findings was that the people who wrote about creativity or the people who wrote about academics as their most important value, they didn't benefit from that treatment condition. And so one of the things I'd like to talk about is that Schnabel and her colleagues who found that social belonging themes is the key to self-affirmation, they said those people can also benefit from a self-affirmation. But it all has to do with the wording. So in their revised self-affirmation prompt, instead of saying, write about why this value is important to you and to who you are, they instead said, write about why this value makes you feel more connected to other people. And so as this work moves forward, as people start using self-affirmation as a means to help people with low self-esteem, careful attention should be placed on the wording so that everyone can benefit from the self-affirmation intervention. The last thing that I want to say is, how cool is it that we have an intervention that relies on people outside of the romantic relationship? By thinking about other people that you have relationships with, that can help you in your own relationship within the romantic partnership. Some of you might be thinking, what about those relationships that really should end, or the partners that really don't care about their partners? I just wanted to say my research doesn't in particular address those situations, but rather relationships in which people misperceive rejection from a loving partner. With that, I hope that I've convinced you that even though low self-esteem can have negative implications for romantic relationships, it doesn't have to. We have tools like the self-affirmation tool, as well as others that can successfully help people with low self-esteem. And so as you leave these doors today, I hope that you'll be able to walk away with a better sense of the people in your life who may have low self-esteem, and walk away with a tool that can actually help. With that, I do want to open it up to questions, if you have any.
It was a great talk, Teresa. Thank you. It looked like the people who had other values relative to the social values people actually had more intimate relationships at the beginning. I think it's
Right.
right. And so, do you think that's a coincidence, or do you think that there's a reason that the people who valued the social relationships had less
That's
intimate?
a really interesting question. And so for the sake of time, I didn't have the ability to go into that, but I make a couple of predictions in my paper. With one being, people who ranked other values, a fair number of them had ranked independence as their most important value. You can imagine, so my prediction is, it's not so much that this is important, but that we see this decline. And so if you have people who ranked independence as their number one value, and then they write about why independence is so important, that you could imagine how that might hurt the relationship intimacy. And in fact, what I did is I looked at participants who had ranked independence, and then looked at what conflicts they chose to write about with their partners. And so after explaining independence is so important to me, I need to have my own voice, they then wrote, well, at times my partner just tells me what to do and I really don't like it. And so I predict that's the reason why we see this decline. Does that answer your question?
In part, it's not so much the decline as the control people having the highest level of
Yes.
relationship intimacy, those independent people that we talk about.
So the N for these
Yeah.
two groups, this was 20 and this was 42. So they weren't evenly distributed, and so I might think that it's spurious. Future work would try and address that issue. Is this coincidence, or is there a reason?
Great, thanks.
Yeah. Before I do end, I do want to thank the people who helped me with this research, and in particular, I want to thank Professor Walton. He's been truly a valuable guide throughout this entire research process, and it's been one of the highlights of my Stanford experience to work with him. I'd also like to thank Tamara Sims for helping me throughout my statistical analyses, and I'd also like to thank my romantic partner for really helping me have fun throughout this entire process. And of course, I do want to thank you, my audience, for listening to me. It has been such a pleasure.